On a narrow, dust-choked trail that cut through jagged rocks and thorny scrub, a lone woman faltered, every step an agonizing effort. Her hand rested upon a swollen belly, the fragile life within a beacon of hope against the relentless cruelty she had just endured. Behind her, the distant dust cloud marked the retreating caravan, cold, unyielding, and merciless. Cast out without a word, she was left to face the wilderness alone, her breath ragged and mingled with the dry wind that whispered threats through sparse cottonwoods. Somewhere beyond the endless sky, silent eyes tracked her staggering form, hidden in the shadows between gnarled branches. The landscape stretched out, barren and unforgiving. Parched earth cracked beneath blazing sunlight, casting a golden haze that blurred the ragged horizon. Sparse brush and twisted sage clung stubbornly to the rocky soil, and every crunch of brittle twigs beneath her weary boots was swallowed by the oppressive silence of the desert. The scent of dust and dried pine needles hung thick in the air, mingled with the faint, familiar trace of smoke from distant campfires long abandoned. There was no shelter here, only the scorching sun by day and the threatening chill lurking in the deepening twilight. The weight of isolation pressed down on her, a cruel reminder that in this wilderness, the faintest sign of weakness could mean death. Her name had been lost in the last moments of hurried departure. But her story was etched plainly in the weary curve of her shoulders and the desperation etched in her eyes. Each breath drew jagged, shallow as if the very air conspired to rob her strength. Parched lips cracked with thirst, but no water offered relief, only the endless expanse stretching mercilessly ahead. Fear gnawed at her resolve, for the trail behind held not safety, but rejection, a bitter exile from the only semblance of community she had ever known. With every step forward, she fought an invisible battle, torn between the instinct to collapse beneath the hot sun and the burning hope cradled within her womb. Just as her legs threatened to give way, a sudden rustle echoed behind a gnarled oak, and she froze, heart pounding like a wild drum. Into the fading light emerged a tall figure, cloaked in the earth's colors, steps silent but deliberate. His eyes, deep and steady, held the knowledge of these lands, a knowledge born from centuries of survival. The Apache hunter's face bore the marks of hardship and wisdom, his gaze flickering first with caution, then something softer, compassion edged with caution. He knelt carefully at a respectful distance, his voice low and steady. "You should not walk alone out here. The night is cruel to those unprepared." She tightened her arms around herself, suspicion flashing in her eyes, a language older than words. Her voice barely a whisper, tinged with exhaustion and distrust. She replied, "I have nowhere else to go. The caravan, they left me for dead." The breeze carried away the bitterness, but the weight of loneliness remained. The hunter studied her, the lines of her face, the swollen promise she carried. His people had learned to see what others missed, the resilience beneath vulnerability, the strength born of hardship. He reached out slowly, offering a water gourd, his gesture a fragile bridge across their worlds. The woman hesitated, torn between fear and fragile trust. before taking the gift with trembling hands. The moment hung suspended. Two lives, bound for collision or alliance, teetering at the edge of an uncertain fate. The desert sun sank lower, shadows lengthening, as if to swallow them whole. Suddenly, a harsh rhythm shattered the quiet. From the ridge above, the sharp thunder of hooves galloping fast and hard pierced the cool air. The hunter's eyes narrowed, scanning the dust swirling against the fading light. These were not riders from the settler camp. They wore masks, faces set with grim purpose, closing the distance with terrifying speed. The fragile thread holding them together trembled under the weight of the approaching threat. Many wanderers along these unforgiving trails have told us how fate, or that fickle YouTube algorithm, sometimes tears away their subscriptions without warning. Before the next dangerous path unfolds and a new twist reveals itself, take a quick look below and make sure you're still part of our band, to never lose the thread of this tale. We don't want you to miss a single voice echoing from this wild frontier. Check your subscription now and join our saga. The roar of hooves thundered closer, shaking the very ground beneath them. The Apache hunter's eyes sharpened, shifting like flint beneath the dying light. His breath hitched, not from fear, but from urgency. The riders weren't just a threat, they were a reckoning. He hadn't seen masked pursuers like those since darker days long past, but their purpose was unmistakable, relentless and unforgiving. "You must move," he whispered, voice rough like scraped leather. He offered his hand, steady and sure, but the woman's gaze wavered between dread and fragile hope. Her legs trembled, but with a silent nod, she grasped it. The hunter used the grip to steady her as the sky deepened to bruised purple overhead. They slipped into the shadows cast by a jagged outcrop, hearts pounding beneath the heavy silence that stretched between hurried breaths and the far-off call of a lone coyote. The woman clung to the water gourd, the meager gift of fragile thread anchoring her to the stranger whose world seemed both alien and urgent. "They want to find you," the hunter said, his eyes scanning the jagged ridges that slice the horizon. "They come for more than just you." Confusion flickered, then terror behind her eyes. "Why? What do they want?" He sighed, his gaze distant. "Because you carry a seed, one they fear. A life that could change the balance." He spoke not just of the child within her, but of the power it represented, a hope wrapped in fragility amid brutality. Her swollen hand pressed tighter to her belly, a pulse beating in sync with the desert's steady, relentless heartbeat. The wind whispered secrets through the brittle sagebrush, filling the narrow canyon with a tension thick enough to choke on. The chase's drumbeats grew louder, shadows twisting and snapping like dry bones. The hunter moved with purposeful silence, guiding her through a maze of rocks that could swallow even the keenest tracker. The woman's breath came hard, every step laced with pain, but surrender dared not cross her mind. Ahead, a dark hollow carved into the rocky spine, an ancient shelter used by those who knew these lands intimately. The hunter slipped in first, urging her onward. Inside, the air was cooler, heavy with the scent of earth and old smoke. For the first time, weight seemed to lift from her shoulders, if only slightly. She sank onto a bed of woven reeds, the hunter kneeling opposite. his hands, scarred, like the land's own wounds, steadied the water gourd as he offered it again. She drank, the liquid cool against her cracked lips, sending shivers through her weary body. "Tell me your name," he said quietly, the tone offering a fragile invitation. She hesitated, shadows flickering across her face. "Isabel, I was with the caravan, but they turned on me, said I weakened them." The words hung heavy, edged with bitter loss. The hunter's eyes softened, yet a flicker of warning remained. "The frontier is a place where mercy is earned in blood, and trust is a rare jewel. Your fight is not just with those behind you. The desert holds its own dangers, and I can protect you, but you must stand strong." Isabel met his gaze, exhaustion dulling her defenses. "I don't know how, but I will try, for the child." Her voice cracked, raw with a mother's fierce hope. A slow nod came, gratitude tempered with caution. "Then we are bound by fate, you and I." He reached inside his cloak and produced a small bundle wrapped in soft cloth. Herbs and roots gathered from the land, ancient remedies taught by his people. "These will ease your pain. The journey is not over." From outside, a faint scrape disrupted the fragile calm. Both frozen, senses flaring. The hunter's hand moved silently to the spear at his side. They are close, closer than before. His voice a low growl, mingled with the desert's growing chill. Isabel's heart hammered louder than the pounding hooves that still echoed faintly. What do we do now? We wait, watch, and trust the land's silence. But you must be ready to run again, or hide where none dare look. His eyes swept the cavern's narrow entrance, shadows and stone blurring like shifting ghosts. She swallowed her fear and drew a ragged breath. A fragile ember of defiance sparked within. "If they find me, if I lose this chance, my child's life will be lost too." The hunter's gaze was steady and unyielding. "Then we will fight, not just for survival, but for something more, for the future." Above them, the sun died behind the distant horizon, the sky bleeding streaks of crimson and gold. The canyon seemed to hold its breath, as if the land itself awaited the storm's coming. Suddenly, a sharp, metallic clang shattered the tension. From the darkness outside, a flintlock pistol's bullet embedded itself in the cave's stone wall, mere inches from the hunter's arm. Without hesitation, he sprang forward, dragging Isabel behind a jutting boulder as masked figures rode into view, hooves drumming a relentless rhythm of dread. The leader threw back his hood, revealing eyes as cold and ruthless as the desert night. "You can't hide forever, woman, and the Apache's mercy ends here." Isabel's fingers clenched the cloth over her belly, tears stinging her dust-choked throat. The hunter's steady hands raised his spear, a silent vow breaking through the shadows. They would not go quietly into that merciless night. Above the rising wind, the woman's whispered vow escaped. Trembling lips. "For my child, I will not let them take our future." A voice shattered the fragile veil of silence, the arrival of another rider, galloping hard and fast, carrying a desperate message that would change everything. The flintlock's shot echoed sharply through the narrow cavern, embedding itself with a scarred promise just inches from the hunter's forearm. Instinctively, He yanked Isabel behind a jutting boulder, the sharp sting of adrenaline igniting every nerve. Outside, the masked riders emerged from the gathering dusk, their hooves drumming a relentless rhythm that stirred the stones beneath their feet. The leader stepped forward, shadows peeling away to reveal eyes hard as obsidian, cold and merciless beneath a scarred brow. "You can't hide forever, woman," he snarled, voice laced with cruel certainty. "And the Apache's mercy runs dry tonight." Isabel pressed a trembling hand over her swollen belly, tears blurring her cracked lips. The ache in her heart surged with the rising desert wind, a tension so thick it seemed to throb alongside the relentless pounding of approaching hooves. The hunter's gaze was steel, unwavering, as he tightened his grip on the spear, soured with desert dust. "We'll stand," he vowed, voice low but fierce as the desert fire dying beyond the ridges. "Not for surrender, but for the fight our future demands." The narrow cavern felt impossibly small, walls closing in as shadows twisted like restless spirits around their grim vigil. For a moment, the silence roared with the beating of two hearts, or perhaps the entire canyon held its breath, awaiting the brink of storm. Suddenly, a desperate voice sliced through the tense air, urgent, ragged, and foreign to their solitude. A figure burst through the cave's jagged entrance, a rider pushing their weary horse to the edge, dust swirling like ghostly smoke beneath pounding hooves. His eyes, wild and desperate, fixed on Isabel with a hunger carved from months of fear. "Isabel," the voice cracked, raw and desperate. "They're coming faster than ever. More than just the masked riders. There's a whole company behind them, led by Captain Graves." Isabel's body stiffened, cold shadows threading through her warmth as terror spread. Captain Graves, the name alone ignited memories of ruthless raids, merciless hunts, and whispered fears carving through every frontier camp. He was a terror that clawed, deeper than any desert sun could sear. The hunter stood abruptly, spear cutting a silent line through the thickening gloom. "Graves," he muttered, lips tightening. "He hunts with a darkness beyond the usual cruelty. If he comes, there will be no mercy, only ruin." Isabel sank to her knees, breath hitching, but the light of defiance flared in her sunken eyes. "I can't let them take this life too. Not after all this." The rider crawled forward, gravel scratching beneath unsteady hands, pressing a small, folded note into the hunter's calloused palm. The Apache's dark eyes flickered over the hastily scrawled words, secrets hidden within cryptic letters that spoke of betrayal and a path to salvation, tangled in shadows deeper than the canyon's throat. Outside, the first stars began to bleed into the bruised sky, indifferent to the coming violence. The masked riders had fallen silent for now, but their steps echoed like a drumbeat of doom. The hunter exhaled slowly, the air thick with ancient fears and newfound resolve. "We will need allies, old friends from the mesas, those who walk between worlds unseen by Graves's spies. But time is a blade cutting quick." Isabel's hands clenched the water gourd again, knuckles white. "If they catch me, it's not just me they'll take. It's hope. It's all there is left." A slow wind slipped through the cavern's mouth, carrying the scent of smoke and danger. The hunter's voice dropped to a whisper, merging with the shadows. Then we fight, not just to survive, but to kindle a light in this darkness. The horizon wept its last golden flare as night swallowed the desert whole. The echo of horses drew closer again, the chase's cruel drumbeat lunging through the dark like a storm's heart. And then, the silent silhouette of a second rider appeared beyond the twisted rock. Cloaked, unmasked, the figure halted, gaze piercing the shadows into the depths where Isabel crouched. Eyes locking, the stranger's voice fell sharp, chattering the fragile calm. The time has come. They've crossed more lines than you know. What you carry will change everything. The war will find no end unless it is met with fire. Isabel's breath caught, hope and dread entwined in a fragile dance inside her chest. Behind the cavern entrance, the hunter's spear rose, a sentinel against a night thick with peril. And the woman's whispered vow splintered the silence like shattered glass. For my child, and for the land that could still be free, we will not bow. The desert's breath cooled as the first shot was fired outside, heralding a war that would echo through canyons and hearts alike. And in the shadows, beyond the reach of firelight, the eyes of the pursuers gleamed, waiting for the moment the fragile alliance would break. The sharp report of the flintlock pistol echoed like a sudden thunderclap, lodging itself deep into the jagged stone, mere inches from the hunter's arm. His reflexes were honed by years beneath the merciless sun and the unforgiving night of these lands. With a swift pull, he dragged Isabel behind a jutting boulder, the sting of adrenaline slicing through the exhaustion that weighed her down. Outside, shadows shifted and coiled as the masked riders stormed into view, their horses' hooves drumming a relentless, heart-pounding rhythm. The leader threw back his hood, revealing eyes as cold and merciless as desert night. "You can't hide forever, woman," he snarled. "And the Apache's mercy ends here." Isabel pressed a trembling hand over her swollen belly. Dust and tears clung to her cracked lips, her breaths ragged but fueled by a ferocity only a mother could summon. The desert wind whipped cruel reminders of all she had lost, of the dangers still closing in. The hunter's gaze sharpened, dark and unyielding. His fingers tightened around the spear, the wood rough beneath calloused skin. "We stand here," he vowed, voice low like the distant rumble of approaching thunder. "Not for submission, but for the fight necessary to protect the future." The narrow cavern swallowed their words, the silence swelling with the tension of two hearts pounding like war drums, the canyon itself seeming to hold its breath beneath the gathering storm. Suddenly, from the cavern's shadowed mouth, a desperate voice tore through the stifling air, ragged, urgent, and unfamiliar to their solitude. A rider burst inside, pushing their weary horse nearly to collapse. Dust spiraled like ghostly smoke around pounding hooves and trembling legs. The man's eyes, wide with a primal fear woven from months of hard flight, locked onto Isabel with a hunger born of dread. "Isabel," his voice cracked, raw with desperation. They're coming faster, more than the masked riders. There's a whole company behind them, led by Captain Graves. Fear cascaded through Isabel's veins, cold and merciless. Graves, a name whispered in trembling tones, painted in blood. Raids, ruthless hunts, a shadow darker than the deepest canyon. Memories clawed at the edges of her mind, each one sharper than the last sunburned day. The hunter rose, spear slicing the stale air. Hard-edged resolve etched on every line of his face. Graves. The word slipped from his lips like a curse. He hunts with a cruelty beyond the usual savagery. If he comes, there will be no mercy, only ruin. Isabel's knees folded beneath her, breath hitching, but fire flared in her eyes, dizzy with fatigue, but unbroken in spirit. My child, I won't let them take this life too, not after all that's come. The rider lowered himself heavily to the earthen floor, gravel clawing at his worn hands as he pressed something into the hunter's palm. A folded note, bearing hastily scrawled words, cryptic and urgent, like the whisper of unseen shadows, hiding deeper dangers. Secrets, promising betrayal and salvation, tangled in riddles, darker than the canyon's throat. Outside, the first stars bled tiny wounds into the bruised night sky. The masked riders held their silence for now, but the dread echoed like a steady pulse, a relentless drumbeat of impending doom. The hunter exhaled, slow and deliberate. Ancient fears warred with emerging resolve. We'll need allies, old friends from the mesas, those who walk unseen between worlds, masters of silence. Graves spies everywhere, and time is but a razor's edge. Isabel clutched the water gourd anew, knuckles white as bone. If they catch me, it's not just me they'll take, it's hope. Everything left to fight for. Wind slipped through the cavern's mouth, carrying a scent scorched by smoke and the sharpened sting of danger. The hunter lowered his voice to a whisper melded with the gathering shadows. Then we fight, not just for survival, but to kindle a flame against this endless night. The earth seemed to exhale as twilight surrendered to black velvet. Hoofbeats drummed again, closer, sharper, a cruel call that throbbed through the canyon, pulling every shadow taut. A silhouette emerged beyond the jagged rocks, the form of a second rider. Cloaked, unmasked, the stranger halted, voice cutting the fragile calm with the cold promise of inevitability. The time has come, the rider said, eyes piercing through darkness and desperation alike. They've crossed bloodlines and sacred bounds. What you carry will change the world. This war will end only if met with fire. Isabel's breath caught between fragile hope and rising dread, a flicker of fierce determination burning through the weariness. The hunter's spear rose, silent, unwavering, a sentinel drawn to guard the fragile ember of tomorrow. Isabel's whispered vow shattered the solemn quiet, like brittle glass breaking free of the desert's hold. For my child, and for the land still trembling beneath the stars, we will not bow. Beyond the cave, the first gunshot cracked the night. A spark that ignited a storm soon to sweep through canyons, hearts, and bloodlines alike. And in the shadows beyond firelight, the pursuer's eyes gleamed, waiting, watching, knowing the fragile alliance was poised on the edge of ruin, ready to fracture with the coming dawn. The flintlock's report had barely faded when the hunter yanked Isabel behind a jutting boulder, the sharp sting of adrenaline slicing through the exhaustion, tethering her limbs. Outside, the masked riders settled into a grim silence, their horses' hooves pounding out a relentless, heart-choking rhythm that seemed to shake the very bones beneath them. The leader pushed back his hood, the cruel glint of his eyes cutting through the gathering dusk like obsidian knives. "You can't hide forever, woman," he sneered, voice dripping with cold certainty. "And the Apache's mercy ends tonight." Isabel's shaky hand clenched tighter over her swollen belly. Tears welled in her dust-cracked throat. Around her, the desert wind whispered bitter reminders of all that had been lost, and the dangers still closing in. The hunter's gaze narrowed, sharp as flint under the darkening sky. His grip tightened on the spear, rough and scarred like the land itself. "We stand here," he said low, voice steady like the steady pulse of approaching thunder. "Not to surrender, but to fight for what will come." The cavern walls swallowed their words, the silence swelling into a thick, suffocating breath. In the stillness, the pounding of two hearts echoed like war drums, as if the canyon itself held its breath, awaiting the inevitable storm. Suddenly, a voice, urgent and ragged, broke through the mounting tension. The cave's mouth swallowed a figure who pushed a weary horse nearly to collapse. Dust swirled like restless ghosts beneath pounding hooves and trembling limbs. The rider's wild eyes locked onto Isabel with desperate hunger born of months on the run. "Isabel," his voice cracked with raw urgency, "they're coming faster. Not just the masked riders. There's a whole company behind them. Captain Graves leads them." Fear cascaded through her veins like ice water, ruthless and consuming. The name Graves clawed awake a dozen nights of whispered terror. Ruthless raids, merciless hunts, shadows darker than the harshest desert sun. Memories flared, a torrent of flames licking at the edges of her mind. The hunter rose, spears slicing the stale air. Resolve carved stark on his face. "Graves," he muttered like a curse. "He hunts with a cruelty beyond the usual savagery. If he comes, there will be no mercy, only ruin." Isabel sank to her knees, breath hitching, but fire blazed in her weary eyes, dizzy with fatigue, but unbroken in spirit. "My child, I won't let them take this life too. Not after all." The rider dropped to the floor, gravel biting his hands as he pressed a folded note into the hunter's palm. The Apache's dark eyes flickered over the hastily scrawled words, cryptic lines that whispered of betrayal and salvation entangled in shadows deeper than the canyon's cold throat. Outside, the first stars bled softly against the bruised night canvas. The masked riders held their silence. For now, but dread echoed like a steady drumbeat of coming doom. The hunter exhaled slow, deliberate, ancient fears warring with newfound resolve. "We need allies, Old friends from the mesas, walkers between worlds, unseen by Graves' spies. Time is but a razor's edge. Isabel gripped the water gourd anew, knuckles white as brittle bone. If they catch me, it's not just me they'll take. They'll rob the last spark of hope left to fight for. A cold wind slipped through the cavern's mouth, carrying smoke's scorched scent and danger's sharp sting. The hunter's voice dropped to a whisper, melding with gathering shadows. Then we fight, not just to survive, but to kindle a flame against this endless night. The earth seemed to exhale as twilight gave way to black velvet. Hoofbeats pounded again, closer now, sharp, cruel, a call pounding through the canyon like a summoned storm. A silhouette appeared beyond jagged rocks, a second rider, cloaked and unmasked, halting to speak with cold finality. "The time has come," the rider said, eyes piercing through darkness and desperation alike. "They've crossed bloodlines and sacred bounds. What you carry," his voice faltered, only to sharpen, "will change the world. This war ends only when met with fire." Isabel's breath caught, suspended between desperate hope and rising dread, a fierce ember of defiance kindling through exhaustion. The hunter's spear rose, silent, unwavering, a sentinel guarding the fragile ember of tomorrow. Isabel's whispered vow shattered the cavern's solemn quiet, like brittle glass breaking free from the desert's hold. "For my child, and for the land still trembling beneath these stars, we will not bow." Beyond the cave, the first gunshot cracked the night, a spark igniting a storm that would tear through canyons, hearts, and bloodlines alike. In the deep shadows, where firelight dared not reach, the pursuer's eyes gleamed, watching, waiting, knowing the fragile alliance balanced on the edge of ruin, poised to fracture under the coming dawn. And then, from the dark approach of a hidden ridge, another set of hoofbeats thundered, a lone rider breaking the silence, galloping fast and hard, bearing a message that would shatter all hopes of sanctuary. The flintlock's shot reverberated like a clap of thunder, lodging mere inches from the hunter's arm. Reflex honed by years beneath a relentless sun sprang to life, and he yanked Isabel behind a jutting boulder. Her breath hitched, sharp and ragged, while adrenaline surged through her veins, stealing away the fatigue that threatened to pull her under. Outside, the masked riders circled the cavern's mouth, their horses' hooves hammering the cracked earth like a heartbeat of dread. The leader threw back his hood, revealing glinting eyes, cold, merciless, and unyielding. "You can't hide forever, woman," he snarled, voice thick with bitter certainty. "Apache mercy ends here tonight." Isabel pressed a trembling hand to the swell beneath her faded cloak. The life growing there anchored her to a hope flickering amid despair. Dust clung to cracked lips as tears pooled behind tired eyes. The desert's unforgiving wind whispered callous reminders of all she had lost, and of the shadowed dangers closing in like vultures on carrion. The hunter's gaze hardened, cutting through the dying light like sharpened flint. His fingers tightened on the spear's weathered shaft, calluses pressing into splintered wood. "We stand here," he pronounced, voice low and steady as the rumble of distant thunder. "Not to surrender, but to fight for what must remain." The cavern swallowed their words, silence, thick with tension, until it roared between their chests, two hearts pounding a war drum's rhythm. Legs, wide eyes, wild with months of flight, seized upon Isabel like a lifeline. "Isabel!" The cry cracked, raw and urgent. "They're coming faster. Not just the masked riders. A whole company rides behind them. Captain Graves leads the hunt." Cold treacle seeped through her veins. Captain Graves. The name throbbed like a black wound, conjuring memories seared by relentless raids and merciless hunts. Graves was no ordinary foe. He was a shadow, darker than any desert night, a hunter weaving havoc with ruthless certainty. The hunter rose with quiet fury, spear cleaving the stale air. Graves, the name slipped like a curse from cracked lips. He hunts with a cruelty beyond mortal ken. If he finds you, there will be no mercy, only ruin. Isabel sank to trembling knees, breath hitching against the weight inside her. Yet through the haze of exhaustion, fire smoldered in weary eyes. "My child," she whispered, voice fraying but fierce. "They will not take them. Not after all this." The rider slid down, gravel digging into roughened palms as he pressed a folded note into the hunter's scarred hand. The hunter's dark eyes scanned the hurried script, cryptic runes of betrayal and salvation, tangled in heedless shadows, thicker than canyon depths. Outside, stars bled delicate wounds into bruised black. The masked riders held uneasy vigil. Silence grew heavy with dread's drumbeat. The hunter exhaled slow, breath long and grave. Ancient fears withered against mounting resolve. "We need allies, old ones from the mesas, those who stride unseen paths beyond Graves's vision." Time claws at the edge of our hope. Isabel's hands clutched the water gourd so tightly her knuckles whitened. "If they catch me, they will steal more than flesh. They will snuff the last spark, that fragile hope we carry, the future wrapped in this child." A cold wind whispered through the cavern's mouth, scented by smoke and danger's bitter sting. The hunter's voice fell to a low murmur, threading through shadows gathering like storm clouds. "Then we fight, not merely to survive, but to kindle a flame against the night's endless appetite." The earth seemed to breathe a final exhale as twilight surrendered to ink-black velvet. Hoofbeats thundered anew, closer now, a cruel summons vibrating through bone and stone. A shadow emerged beyond fractured rock, cloaked and unmasked. The second rider paused, voice sharp as broken glass, shattering calm. "The time is come," the rider declared, eyes burning through desperation and dark certainty. "They have crossed blood and sacred law. What you carry will change the world. This war ends only when met with fire." Isabel's breath caught, suspended between fierce hope and rising dread. A blaze ignited beneath cracked ribs, despite bones' weariness. The hunter lifted his spear. Silent sentinel against encroaching darkness, Isabel's whispered vow cracked the stillness like fragile glass breaking free. For my child, and the land still trembling beneath these stars, we will not bow. The first gunshot rent night's fragile shroud, a spark igniting storms, destined to carve canyons, hearts, and bloodlines deep. In the shadows beyond flickering firelight, relentless eyes gleamed, watchers. On the edge of ruin, waiting to shatter the fragile alliance at dawn's cruel kiss. From the ridge's dark throat, a new thunder arose, an urgent lone rider cutting through silence, bearing a desperate message that would fracture all hopes of sanctuary. The flintlock's echo still lingered in the fragile silence as the hunter's hand gripped Isabel's shoulder, steadying her trembling form behind the jagged boulder. The bitter sting on his arm throbbed, a sharp reminder of the violence pressing at their heels. Outside, the masked riders shifted like shadows cast by a cruel flame, horses pawing the earth with restless fury, their breaths ragged clouds gathering in the cooling dusk. Isabel's breaths came ragged, each one a battle against the weight nestling within her, a fragile hope against the relentless fury gathering beyond the cavern's mouth. Her fingers clenched, the worn water gourd tighter, knuckles blanching as she fought the dizziness that stalked her like a silent predator. "We don't have time," the hunter murmured, his voice low, rough as desert wind biting cracked stone. "If Graves is leading the others, mercy isn't part of his hunt. We must move before they encircle us." His eyes, dark wells of untold hardship, flicked toward the cavern's narrow entrance where the shadows thickened like a curtain ready to fall. Isabel's gaze hung heavy with fear, yet not broken. "The child, your child," he interrupted gently, "is the key. More than they know, more than even you realize. They fear what your blood carried forward," he said, voice threading through the gathering darkness. "But that means it's our strength, too." The cave, narrow and cool, seemed a fragile refuge, threatened to collapse under the weight of impending storm. The rider who had burst in seconds before now slumped against the rough earth, exhaustion raw in every movement. Still, his eyes burned with desperate urgency. "They're coming faster than we feared," he whispered. "Graves brings an entire company this time, mounted, armed, and ruthless. They cross the line with no thought for mercy or law." Isabel's pulse quickened, her heart clinging fiercely to the growing life inside as a lifeline, tethering her to hope itself. "If they find me, if they take her, they want more than just you," the hunter confirmed, voice hardening. "They want what you carry, the promise of change. That is why you're hunted, why you've been cast out." The silence hung thick, shattered only by distant thunder rolling over the jagged ridges. Outside, the night folded deeper around them, swallowing the last gold of dying sun. "We cannot face them alone," the hunter said, rising with a sudden surge. His spear, a weathered witness to countless battles, caught the last light like a sliver of justice. "But we can buy time, find allies hidden where Graves' eyes cannot see." He cast a glance toward the darkened slopes curling beyond the canyon's rim. "The mesas hold those who walk between worlds, old friends and harder truths." Isabel pushed herself onto unsteady feet, every step aching as pain laced her muscles. Her gaze locked with his, an unspoken pact forged in the silent furnace of shared desperation. "Tell me what to do," she whispered, voice raw but resolute. He sank onto a low stone, hands reaching inside his cloak to produce a bundle wrapped in cloth, the scent of sage and bitter roots rising like whispered prayers. "These will ease your pain, steady the storm in your body. You must be ready for whatever comes. This child, this future, it must live." The cave's entrance darkened as the masked riders drew closer, hooves drumming their menace across the open spaces. Every shadow behind them seemed to pulse with ruthless intent. Without warning, a harsh scraping noise startled them both, a sound sharper than the wind's howl. The hunter's hand darted to, the spear as eyes strained through the gloom. "They're testing our patience," he said grimly, "trying to flush us out." His gaze flicked skyward, noting the thin sliver of moon rising over jagged peaks, a cold sentinel in the night. Isabel swallowed a sharp sob, her hand trembling over the silent life she carried. "If we run, where will we go?" He met her gaze, unwavering. "Where no one tracks footsteps, into the land the world forgot, where the earth still remembers how to hide." She nodded, gathering strength born from raw fear and desperate love. "Then let's move before the night devours us." Their breaths mingled in the cold air, a fragile rhythm against the cacophony of hooves and urgent shadows pressing onward. Slowly, carefully, they stole toward the cavern's shadowed mouth. Suddenly, from the deepening black beyond, a cold voice sliced through the night. A single rider emerging, cloaked and unmasked, silhouette sharp like a blade forged in sorrow. "The time is come," the stranger said, voice low but fierce. "They've crossed sacred lines. What you carry will ignite the fires that can no longer be contained." Isabel's breath caught, a fierce ember igniting amidst her weariness. The hunter raised his spear, a silent sentinel, poised between past and future. "For my child, and for the land that still holds its breath beneath these stars, we will not bow." The rider watched with eyes alight, lips curling in grim promise. "Then prepare, for at dawn the reckoning rides faster than any wind." The sharp crack of the flintlock pistol had barely faded when the hunter yanked Isabel behind the jutting boulder. The sting of the near miss seared his arm, but there was no time to falter. Outside, masked riders swept in like shadows risen from nightmares, their horses pounding the cracked earth in a relentless drumbeat of dread. The leader threw back his hood, revealing eyes colder than desert stone, merciless beneath a creased, scarred brow. "You can't hide forever, woman," the rider hissed, voice dripping with venom. "Apache mercy ends here." Isabel pressed a trembling hand against her swollen belly, the fragile life within her, a beacon against the encroaching terror. Dust choked her cracked lips, tears blurring her vision, yet beneath the exhaustion burned an unyielding flame, a mother's fierce will to protect. The hunter's gaze sharpened sharply, his fingers tightening on the rough wood of his spear. "We stand here." His voice was low, steady as a muted thunder. "Not to surrender, but to fight for the future." The narrow cavern swallowed their breaths and words, silence swelling with a weight so heavy it felt as if the earth itself held its breath. two hearts pounded like war drums, shadows stretching and twisting like restless spirits waiting to strike. Suddenly, a ragged voice tore through the oppressive quiet. A rider burst through the cavern's mouth, pushing his weary horse nearly to collapse. Dust and sweat trailed like ghostly veils beneath pounding hooves and trembling limbs. His eyes were wide, wild with fear born of months on the run. He locked onto Isabel with desperate hunger, the same hunger for survival that ruled them all here. Isabel! His voice cracked raw with urgency. They're coming faster, more than the masked riders. There's a whole company behind them. Captain Graves himself leads the hunt. Her heart seized in a cold grip. Graves. The name was a shadow painted in blood and whispered in fearful camps. Ruthless raids, merciless hunts, darkness deeper than any desert night. Memories clawed at her, sharpened by years of whispered terror. The hunter rose slowly, spear slicing the stale air with hard-edged resolve. Graves. The words slipped like a curse from his cracked lips. He hunts with cruelty beyond the normal savage. If he finds you, there will be no mercy, only ruin. Isabel sank to trembling knees, breath hitching, but fire smoldered in her weary eyes. "My child," she whispered. The word was a fragile vow. "I won't let them take this life, not after all." The rider lowered himself to the earth, gravel biting his palms as he pressed a folded note into the hunter's scarred hands. The hunter's dark eyes flickered over the hastily scrawled words, cryptic lines whispering betrayal and salvation, tangled in shadows darker than the canyon's throat. Outside, stars bled soft wounds into a bruised night sky. The masked riders held uneasy vigil, silence swollen with dread's steady drumbeat. The hunter exhaled slowly, breath long and grave. Ancient fears warred fiercely with newfound resolve. We will need allies, old friends from the mesas, those who walk unseen paths beyond Graves' spies. Time is a blade cutting quick. Isabel gripped the worn water gourd with white-knuckled hands. If they catch me, they'll take more than flesh. They'll snuff out hope, the last fragile spark we carry inside. A wind slipped cold through the cavern's mouth, scented with smoke and the sharp sting of danger. The hunter's voice dropped to a whisper, threading through shadows gathering like storm clouds. Then we fight, not merely to survive, but to kindle a flame against this endless night. The earth seemed to exhale its last breath as twilight surrendered to ink-black velvet. Hoofbeats thundered anew, closer now, a cruel summons vibrating through bone and stone. A shadow emerged beyond fractured rock. Cloaked and unmasked, the second rider halted, voice sharp as broken glass, shattering calm. "The time is come," the rider declared, eyes burning through desperation and dark certainty. "They have crossed bloodlines and sacred law. What you carry will change the world. This war ends only when met with fire." Isabel's breath caught, suspended between fierce hope and rising dread. A blaze ignited beneath cracked ribs despite Bone's weariness. The hunter lifted his spear, silent sentinel against the encroaching darkness. Isabel's whispered vow shattered the cavern's solemn quiet like brittle glass breaking free. "For my child, and for the land still trembling beneath these stars, we will not bow." The first gunshot rent night's fragile shroud. a spark igniting storms destined to carve canyons, hearts, and bloodlines deep. In the shadows beyond flickering firelight, relentless eyes gleamed, watchers on the edge of ruin, waiting to shatter the fragile alliance at dawn's cruel kiss. And then, from the dark approach of a hidden ridge, another set of hoofbeats thundered. A lone rider cutting through silence, galloping fast and hard, bearing a message that would shatter all hopes of sanctuary. The first stars pierced the night sky as silence stretched thick over the jagged ridge. Isabel and the Apache hunter, known to her now as Kalen, crouched within the cavern's shadow, hearts tethered to the fragile thread of hope nestled inside her belly. Outside, the faint drumbeat of hooves persisted, a relentless reminder that time was no ally. Kalen's voice broke the stillness, low yet fierce. "We cannot face Captain Graves alone. We must call upon those who move unseen. The guardians of the mesas, old allies bound by blood and honor." Isabel nodded, a fierce spark burning behind her exhaustion. "If they find me, if they take this child—" Her voice cracked, but the conviction was clear. "Our futures die with us." Before they could move further, a whisper of movement stirred the cavern's entrance. Kalen raised his spear silently, motioning for Isabel to stay back. Shadows melted into the flickering firelight as figures emerged. 4 resolute men, cloaked in earth tones, faces painted with the sacred symbols of the Apache, eyes sharp and steady. Their leader stepped forward, a stoic elder named Mato, whose lines bore stories of countless winters hardened by loss and fight. "We heard the call. Graves's shadow stretches far, but his cruelty will not take root here." Relief softened Isabel's rigid posture, but the tension never left her eyes. She glanced at the note Kalen held, a cryptic plea for aid, a map to survival hidden within a few hastily penned lines. "How much time do we have?" she asked, voice low. Mato's gaze was cold as granite. "Not long. Graves rides fire and steel, 100 strong, his soldiers hardened like desert rock. He means to extinguish what you carry before it can bloom." Kalen's hand brushed tenderly over Isabel's belly. "Then we fight, not with swords alone, but with the spirit of our people." His eyes locked onto hers, steady and unflinching. "Together, we will outwit the darkness. You are not alone." The air grew thick with a solemn promise, the past's scars blending with the flicker of new possibility. As the moon climbed higher, the group moved silently through rugged terrain, seeking refuge in the hidden folds of the mesas. The night air was cold, but held the scent of rain, an omen of renewal whispered by the earth itself. Isabel's steps were measured, every motion weighted with pain and profound hope. Kalen stayed close, his presence a shield against unseen threats lurking in the shadows. Between them, a bond woven from mutual trust and shared peril deepened, transcending ancient divides. Days passed in cautious secrecy. Through the labyrinth of canyons and sagebrush, they sought allies. Every face carried the weariness of survival. Advance rippled like wildfire, sparking resistance among tribes and settlers alike. Finally, at a secluded encampment nestled beneath towering cliffs, the full circle of their defense took shape. warriors with fire in their eyes, women with steady hands and healing herbs, and children whose laughter belied the hardened years, formed a fragile but potent alliance. On the eve of reckoning, Isabel sat near a smoldering fire, hands resting protectively on her womb. Kaelin knelt beside her, offering a bundle wrapped in dried sage and roots, an ancient gift for strength and safe passage. "You carry the seed of tomorrow," he said softly. "This land remembers those who fight for its soul." Isabel's eyes glistened with tears, hope and fear entwined. "I am ready." Before dawn, sentinels spread through the encampment like shadows, alert to the muffled sounds beyond the ridge. The relentless march of an approaching storm led by Graves himself. His reputation had preceded him, a man unmoored from mercy, chasing power amid the bloodied sands. When the first rays of sunlight shattered the horizon, the air ignited with the violence of confrontation. Kaelin fell into the forefront, spear flashing as he moved with the fluid grace of wind over stone, rallying the defenders with a voice that carried the weight not just of battle, but of ancestors' watchful eyes. Isabel stayed near the center of the encampment, guarded but unyielding, cradling her unborn child as those around her fought with the desperate resilience born of love and loss. The clash was fierce and unrelenting, dust and smoke twisting upward like vultures circling fate's altar. Graves's men were ruthless, but the alliance, united by trust and the fierce hope that Isabel carried, held firm. In the chaos, Isabel sensed the fragile bond between herself and Kaelin, transcending even the pain that tightened her breath. When the tide turned, and Graves's forces faltered beneath the combined strength of the warriors, a cry rose, raw and triumphant, cutting through the scorched air. Defeat forced Graves to retreat as swiftly as he'd come, his shadow swallowed by the land that refused surrender. In the quiet aftermath, Isabel stood beneath the open sky, the child within her stirring gently, life's fragile promise unbroken by the storm. Kaelin stepped beside her, voice hushed yet unbreakable. "The frontier breathes anew. The land will heal, as will we. Your child will carry the stories we have fought so hard to protect." She met his gaze, her own now steady and radiant with hard-won peace. "For the first time since this journey began, I believe in tomorrow." The desert sun rose higher, golden and unyielding, casting long shadows behind them as they walked forward. Two souls bound not by blood, but by the fierce, enduring spirit of survival and hope. The trail ahead remained uncertain, but beneath the endless sky, Isabel's whispered vow carried across dust and sage. "We will not bow, not now, not ever." And in that defiant promise, the legacy of a land and its people blossomed eternal, carried forever in the heartbeats of those who dared to dream beyond despair.